Hello, welcome to 2018. This is the first episode of Church Lady, The Cries of a Desperate Woman. And I'm Lorraine D. Jones. I will be your mistress of ceremony for this episode. We are entering and have entered into a brand new year, 2018, a brand new set of 12 months, a new set of 52 weeks, a new 365 days of giving God the praise, of acknowledging God and lifting His name up. And I'm so excited because I believe in my heart that God is doing a new thing in this new year for many of His people, the people of God. And I'm excited. Now, I'm going to go right into wishing everyone a happy new year, and may your dreams and your hopes and your prayers be realized and come into full fruition this year. Make it happen. And I want to go right into the story of Hosea in the book of Hosea, but my focus is on Gomer. And my topic is title is you don't know my story, but what if you did? And that's something that I want us to laminate on for this month. We're going to be there are 9 points that we want to illustrate. And again, as we did last month, we will be focusing on 3 each week. And so we want to just get right into the first 3 and to understand who Gomer was is to understand who we are today. Oftentimes I've heard the story and the text read from Hosea, the book of Hosea, and you can read it in your own downtime. But in every story, the significant person was Hosea. The significant being was God. So the emphasis was always placed on either Hosea or on God. And Gomer was always an insignificant part of the story. Who she was never really relevant and significant enough for anyone to bother to go into past her being a whore. And I would want to venture to say, as we begin to take a closer look at who Gomer was and to understand who she is, she was a desperate woman. And I know I'm playing with the tense when I say is and was, but follow me anyway. If we can understand who Gomer was in the Bible, we can understand the Gomer in us today. How about that? And that's whether you're in church or out of church, because either way, there's some Gomer in us as women, and it makes us desperate. And we have to, if we can pick that up and seed into that, then the love of God can be manifested as the story signifies God's love ultimately for us. Then we can signify and understand how significant it is, Gomer's story, so that we can show that same love towards and reach those that are in our church, in our communities, in our families, as well as those who are not. A songwriter wrote a song and said, they will know us, the church, by our love. And we seem to have some trouble even acknowledging and allowing the Gomers in our environment, whether it's on the job, in the community, or even within our own immediate family. We don't play their role as being one of significance. The fact that they're still living and breathing in and out God's air means that they're significant to God. But when we have questionable family members with questionable reputations and credibility, we tend not to want to spend much time getting to know them and being in their presence or allowing them to be in our presence. But as Hosea entered into Gomer's life and became relevant as far as allowing the God presence in her life, then, and the God's love, that agape love in her um, um, environment, as significant as that was to Gomar, that's how significant when we are in the presence of someone who has questionable reputations or behaviors. We represent Christ. We represent the love of God to that person. And who's to say? I used to say it all the time. When, particularly for singles that live alone and that are in God, when they get that hug on Sunday, make it a good hug, or don't hug at all, because that may be the only hug they receive all week, and that matters. And everyone that is living, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their behavior or their environment or their reputation, everyone that is still breathing is significant, and we need to acknowledge them and appreciate their presence and show the love of God towards them. And this is why I'm desperate for us to understand who Gomar really was, because to understand who Gomar really was, we really are preparing ourselves for outreach. We really are preparing ourselves for in-reach, because you have to know the audience. You have to know the people that you're speaking to, that you're trying to introduce to Christ. You have to understand where they're coming from. And many times we don't, because I had to realize I didn't want to give this story. I didn't want to share this story, because I recognized Gomar in me. And it was difficult for me to reconcile with that. But God, He's merciful and He's kind and extremely patient. And so I want to share the story of Gomar, because it's so important that we understand it from Gomar's perspective, because you have to understand this is Gomar's story. And so let's get into my 3 points. The first point that I want to point out in Gomar's story is that Gomar was raised to be and to live the way she lived. She was raised that way. She was raised to be that way. She was raised to live that way. She was her father's daughter. She was raised in his house. She lived by his standards, his rules, his regulations. And this is the way he raised her to be. This was her family life. This was her environment. Her family didn't expect her to be anything more than a very sensuous, a very sexual, promiscuous person. The community didn't expect anything different from her. Whose child is this? This is Gomar's father's. This is Gomar's father's child. That's who she was. She was her father's daughter. And he was a man of a certain reputation. He was a very sensual, he was a very sexual man. So his household was ran in that manner. And so that's the way she was brought up. That's the system she was under. And that's what she understood. You see, she was raised to everything sexual, everything sensual was her purpose. That was her reason for being. This is the system that she was brought up under. So this is all she knew. She did not know God prior to Hosea. She knew her father's rules and regulations because she was daddy's girl. And we live in a time where we can pass judgment on people and say, oh, she was very promiscuous. Oh, she was a whore. Oh, she was a prostitute. Oh, she was this. Let me tell you something. She was not. I don't believe that Gomar was a whore, because you see, whores give it away. I believe she was a prostitute because they get paid. Now, the problem with prostitutes is that they turn around and traditionally give it to a pimp. So they make the money and then they give it away. Now, how does that relate to us today as church folks, as women who have standards that we live by and govern ourselves by? We're not like that, right? Let's find out. What I had to realize was that today we live and operate under certain systems, just like Gomar operated under her father's systems. We operate under societal systems today. We were raised to believe that you go to school so that you can get a good education, so that you can get a good job, so that you can provide a good so that you can provide for your good, well, for your children, for your family, and be independent. Correct? Let's take a closer look at that system. As we took a closer look at Gomar, let's take a look at the system that Gomar was raised under, was her father's, and it did not work for her. And we know that ultimately that system of living as a prostitute, living promiscuous life, living a sensual life, that did not work for Gomar ultimately. And it's not working. The system, living under a societal system, does not work for us. If we look at it closely, we'll see that that is the case for us. And that is, we went to school and we did that. We obtained an education, right? However, I graduated almost 40 years ago. And I graduated with folks that received the exact same diploma that I received from high school. And I was reading at a 12 plus level. And they received the exact same diploma that I received. But they were reading at under a third grade level, second grade and first grade levels. And they had the exact same diploma that I received. So we're talking about an educational system that failed to educate. But the system allowed them to pass us through until they passed us out of that educational system. Then we had to pay for it. And then I just want you to know that here I am. And I now have two college degrees. And I still don't understand math. And many of you know the nightmare math was for me. I still, the only thing I know about science is H2O means water. And that's after paying. That's after 12 years of public education and then going on to pay for 2 college degrees. I still don't understand science. I still don't know how to do the math. But I've got 2 college degrees that says I successfully completed it. That system clearly is flawed. And yet, you still don't, we're looking at coming out of high school. And let's say that somehow miraculously you went through the public school system and you did come out understanding math and science and reading at a 12th grade level. And you did go on to college and somehow miraculously you came through that. You went through the systemic and institutionalized racism. You went through the implicit biases and the covert biases. You went through the discrimination. You made it through miraculously that hostile learning environment, and you successfully received your degrees, and you went on and you got the job. And then you excelled on that job, and somehow you end up and you're making 6 figures. $100,000 a year. And many of us are doing this. And the problem is your debt is also 6 figures. So now I'm not good at math, but follow me if you can. If you make $100,000 a year, that's your income. And then your outcome, because you have debt, that equals $100,000 a year. What is your net? What is the money that you get to keep, that you've made, that you've received? How much of that money do you get to keep? 0. So if you make $100,000 a year, the system says that's what you did. You made $100,000 a year, but you didn't get to keep it because you had to give it away. Like Gomar gave it away. Like the prostitute gives it to the pimp. We're not giving the money to a pimp. We're giving it to the mortgage company. We're giving it to the car dealership. We're giving it to the credit cards. We're giving it to student loans. We're giving it away. We're giving it away. Just like a prostitute gives it to the pimp. We're giving it away. So if your net income is zero, what does that make you? A volunteer slave. And as African Americans living in this country, that system doesn't work for us. So we're just like Gomar. We're operating and living in the system that we have been taught in this society. This is the way we work. This is the way we live. This is the way we survive in this system. These are the guidelines. These are the rules and the regulations that we live by. Just like Gomar lived by her father's guidelines and his rules and his precepts. We live by a societal guidelines and rules and regulations that just don't work for us any more than Gomar living by her father's set of rules was working for her. So now what? So that's my first point, is to understanding Gomar, is that Gomar was raised to be the way she was. She believed in that system, just like we believed that going to school and getting the education and getting a good job would make us successful. We measured our success by societal standards, and it does not work for us any more than it worked for Gomar. That's the Gomar that I saw in myself. And I'm like, this system that doesn't work for me, Gomar needed to get another system. We need to get another system. And that's why MOVE is so important, managing our viability effectively. We've got to put our movements and our viability, our substance, into areas that will work for us, into systems, into rules and guidelines that will work for us. This system of rules and guidelines we see clearly does not work for us. It may work for someone else, but it doesn't work for us. Because we're sending our children now to school for an education in an educational system that is more focused on making them criminals than making them graduates. And we see that through the school pipeline to prison system, where our babies, 5 and 6 year olds, are being handcuffed and the police are called and they're taking them out of the school to the jails. Oh, yes. Check it. Do your research. Our children are being criminalized and not educated in this school system that we believe will provide them in the future as a better life. But what we're learning is that as a child, they're already developing a criminal record that will follow them into the future. All right. And so that was Gomar's situation. And we have to really understand that when we think about Gomar coming up as a child under a system that we know is not going to work for her in the future, it's a flawed system. We're sending our children to school under a system that we know is not going to work for them because, again, it's a flawed system. Our children are consistently ranked at the bottom. Hear me now. It's a system that doesn't work for them. Under standardized tests, they rank at the bottom for math, for reading, for science. Now, understand me well. We came under that same system, and we graduated with and received a high school diploma that said we had completed all of the requirements to earn that. We had learned all of the things we needed to move past that. We were ready for something else, but we'd gotten those basics done. And yet, I graduated with someone that couldn't read, whose reading score was lower than the 8th grade. And many of us today, our reading is lower than the 8th grade level. And we've been out of school for years. In terms of math, today, many of us can't even help our children with the math today because we don't understand it. But more basic than that and more essential for us as head of households, we can't even balance a checkbook. We don't even talk about financial planning or savings, having a savings plan. We can't balance a checkbook. We can't talk about a budget. And see, math plays a part in all of that. Understanding math is key in running your household. And our children are ranking at the bottom consistently, which means they will not be able to do that. So if we know we're sending them to a system that will not prepare them for the future, then that's on us. We can continue sending them there if we want to, but we better do some stuff at home. We better add to and enhance their education from the system that we already know is flawed. It doesn't work. It is not working. And it's not working for us either, because we can't stretch the dollar if we don't understand what the value of that dollar is and how to compute and how to divide and how to multiply that dollar and get the maximum products out of that dollar. We can't budget if we don't do math. We can't balance a checkbook. We can't talk about a savings account or a financial planning for the future if we don't understand math. And when I think in terms of reading, you can't complete a job application if you can't read, because you can't get a job and go through a training that's done online if you can't read, because you can't read the instructions. We're living in a technological age. You've got to be able to read the instructions, or you can't get the promotion to that job that uses technology. And in terms of science, this really makes me very nervous, because many of us don't understand science. We don't know what to do, and if there's grease fire, we don't know how to put that grease fire out and how to handle that grease fire. And many of us are head of household women. We're in the kitchen every day. I'm concerned that we're operating in a system that does not work for us because it is flawed, just like Gomar's system was flawed. So Gomar was raised to be the way she was because of the system that she was under. And we are raised to believe what we believe and to live the way we live because of the system that we're under. But both of us understand, Gomar and us understand, that the system is flawed. And now the second point I want to make is that Hosea knew who and what Gomar was. I'll say that again. Hosea knew who and what Gomar was. He knew she was a woman of ill reputation. He knew she was sensual. He knew she was a prostitute. He knew she was her daddy's daughter. He knew. Gomar didn't know. She didn't run a game on him. She didn't trick him. She didn't pretend to be something she was not. And let me point, while I'm making this point, Gomar didn't run after Hosea. Hosea pursued her. And he knew. And let me prove to you some about that. I know, and the Bible says that he knew because God told him exactly who Gomar was. But God didn't tell Gomar. God told Hosea. Why? Because Hosea had a reputation with God. Hosea had a relationship with God. Hosea had a dialogue and a communication with God. That's why God told him. And he told him why. Hosea knew what he was getting into. I'll tell you something else Hosea knew. Hosea knew she was going to break his heart. See, God told him that too. Hosea knew before he went after her. He knew who she was. He knew what she did. He knew this woman. He knew she was desperate. He knew she needed to change. And he knew she did not know his God. He knew that she didn't share his faith, his religion, or his convictions. He knew all of this. And yet, this was a marriage made in heaven. And he knew that too. And so my point today is that we're dealing with people today that are in our communities, on our jobs, even in our families, and in our churches who don't know. They don't have that story in their background. They weren't churched as children. They didn't come from a holistic background that everything was centered around acknowledging God. They weren't Sunday school students. They didn't grow up in a praying house. And we know this. And yet we expect them to act like us. We're talking about a flawed system. That's not going to work. Church, they're not going to act like they have a relationship with God, like they know who God is, like they understand and have experienced the love of God. They don't know. And so to expect them to automatically dress and talk and testify and sing and dance and praise God like us. That's a flawed way of thinking. They don't know. So they may come in your church and get so excited about and emotional about being in the service and about what they're feeling and thinking and experiencing. And they want to dance before the Lord too. But the only dance they know is how to, what is that dance? Step. Don't look at them like they out of place and out of line because they stepping in church. They don't know how to do a holy dance. But we will turn up our nose. They get to testifying and they may use a whole lot of street terms that you want to get a dictionary to define what they're talking about. Because they don't speak your language. They don't know church jargon. But they got a story they want to testify too. But they're not going to talk like you talk. They may say some things that you think is out of place, but they don't know. Now, if you say some things out of place and you know, see, that's the difference. Hosea knew. Gomer didn't. And see, we tell the story like she was supposed to know. Gomer didn't know. She wasn't raised that way. That wasn't part of her story. That's not her testimony. And we need to understand that these are the people that we deal with when we bring people and invite folks to church, including our own family members, that they're not going to, just because they're your family, doesn't mean that they carry themselves the way you carry yourself. And we have to love them like Hosea loved Gomer, because Hosea knew. He knew that she did not know what he knew. And church, we know that they don't know what we know. But it's our responsibility to cover them. Just like it was Hosea's responsibility to cover her. Just like Joseph covered Mary. And so as I move on, I do believe I've made my point. Yes. So let me move on to my final point. And that is that I've already been speaking on it. He knew, she did not. He knew who God was. He knew that she did not know about she had not experienced the love of God. She had no idea of how to be loved, how to be respected, how to be cherished, how to adorn herself, how to be carry herself with respect. She had no idea. But he did. And this was his job and his responsibility as her husband to cover her like Joseph covered Mary. That's what you do. When you marry someone, you cover them. And Hosea, he knew and he didn't do it. And we'll talk about that next week. See, this is Gomar's story. And we need to know that Gomar is significant in her own story. We need to know that we're significant in our own story. That's why you don't let another man tell your story, because he will not portray himself as the villain, even if he is the villain in your story. But when he tell it, he'll make you the villain, as we've seen in with the cowboys and the Indian stories, with our native with Indians, the cowboys and Indians. The cowboys told the story, and they didn't tell it the same way as the Indians tell their story. And we have to recognize that. There's a reason for that, because they're not going, when someone else tells your story, it's no longer your story, it's his story. It's his story. And that is why we can't allow that to happen. We need to tell our own story. We need Gomar's story. We need Gomar to tell her story so that we can understand and know that it is our story. And so my final point that I want to make today is that Gomar was not a whore. She was a prostitute. And because she made the money and then she gave it away. We today, we're actually making more money than we've ever made in the history of African Americans in this country, but we're still giving it away. That's a system that's flawed, that's not working any more than Gomar's father's system was working for her. The advantage that we have in the body of Christ is that we can go into our families, we can go into our communities, and we can do like Hosea did. We can go and get the Gomars and bring them in. We can go and get them and attach and align ourselves with them. And understand that we know they don't know. But we know. Because God has told us. And we need to go into that vineyard and work. Because we know that the labors are few, but the harvest is ripe. So understanding that Gomar is a woman that would do better if she knew better. That's the story. We don't know her story because we have been patterned after Hosea, after God's version, and she has never played a significant role in her own story. But this month, we're going to know her, and we're going to know that she is us. One church, one community, operating with one voice, because we've got to move. We've got to manage our viability effectively in this new day, because God is going to do a new thing, and he's telling us what it is. You don't know Gomar's story, but what if you did? Thank you for watching, Church Lady, and hanging out with me. And tune in again next week for another episode of Church Lady, The Cries of a Desperate Woman, the talk show. Be blessed. I'll see you next time.